Are you ready to learn API programming with Python and FastAPI? The importance of the API programming comes from the capabilities of one computer program to be used from another. There are means with which different computer programs are able to communicate. And only 3 years ago, the FastAPI was created, and this was a revolution for the web services industry. So if you want to be part of that transformation, then this course is going to give you everything you need. You learn how to design and use APIs from scratch. And this course will actually not require from you any prior knowledge about what API Python or FastAPI means. It's all here. And we're going to start from the very basics. We'll start by covering all packages and tools you need to get started with FastAPI, Flask and the Jupyter Notebook. And once you're all set, I will introduce you to the logic and the design ideas behind using an API. And then we'll start programming. We will build several real-world API applications using firstly static APIs such as Flask, and then move to the more advanced asynchronous APIs such as FastAPI. And in fact, Python is actually one of the best tools to manipulate and to get data from internet, which is specifically what API does. See, in the API world, if you are using Python, there are two main toolkits that are quite useful for extracting data from other websites using API, and those are Flask and FastAPI. I'm uploading completely free programming courses every week, so make sure you hit the subscribe button to get more coding skills. Hello everyone! We all think that API could be something scary. We think that it is something like a magic that we don't understand. But in fact, we're all using API each and every day when we're doing web purchases, using mobile applications and so on. So why this should be so scary for us if we actually use it every day? So in general, the API means application programming interface. But this doesn't say actually anything to us. And the important thing here is to understand what the API is actually doing. So the API is basically a set of definitions and protocols for building, communicating and integrating different types of applications that are built with certain type of software. And this is what actually is called here interface. So API is basically a way to interact with applications, but it doesn't provide to the user what is the actual structure of that applications. And this is a very good way for the companies to provide certain information to the users without telling them how actually this data is obtained and processed internally. So as you can see on the graph, we usually have a server which is the database, and the database is accessible from different applications. As you can see, I put here web applications, mobile applications, TV applications. So we can access all this data via using API. And a good example here would be the way that we're purchasing tickets to fly with airplanes. We don't always go to the websites of the companies, but we're going to third-party website where you can see different tickets from the different type of companies and compare them. So those companies are basically communicating with the airline APIs to obtain information about the prices, luggages, different types of offers, times, and so on. And let me give you a little more detailed example so you can understand better what is API. So here we're going to look at some day-to-day situation. So in order to get a ride with the cab, you need to do the following actions. So the first thing you will do is to request to the cab to pick you up, and you will need to provide your contact information and location details. And in response, once you do that, your request will actually get the information for the cab and where we will pick you up. Then once you get a cab, you request to the driver to take you to a specific location, and then again you get a response from the cab driver that he drives you to the desired location again. And notice that here you actually don't need to operate a car in order to get from point A to point B. So in that case, the cab acts like an API. So here he's the API layer, because you might not know how the car operates and how to drive it basically. which sends you to your desired location. So even though now I guess API sounds quite easy for you, now as everything in programming, there are obviously different types of APIs, which makes our work a little bit more complex. So in the real world, obviously there is no customer and driver, but we have HTTP request methods in order to communicate to a certain server. So once you access your browser, basically your actions are creating a HTTP request to the server or to the website, for example, that you want to visit, and then the server provides you the information that you need. So the basic HTTP request methods are GET, and this means that you get some resources from the server. Then you have the POST method, where you send, or the server sent, some data to certain location, but in that case this might change the state of the server. And finally we have the put method, which replaces some data on the server, and this is actually quite similar to the post method, but here there is seen a necessity for the put request to produce some result. Then we have the head method, which basically requests some status of the server or header of certain section. Then you have the connect method, which basically, I know connect means connection, so if you imagine it as a tunnel between you and certain resource on the server, so once you create a tunnel, you can basically inter-exchange with that source. And then we have the options, and obviously options here is used to describe the communication with the target resource with which you already connected. Then we have the trace method, and the trace, obviously from the name you can see that it is used to target certain resource and to find it, to find the path to it. And then the patch method is basically used to apply some modifications to the resource that you assessed. So those are basically all the methods, guys. And those, as you can see, are very few. Obviously we're going to extend that way more once we jump into the Python programming. But that's all for today. This is the brief introduction to API. I hope it was actually useful for you. We use some real-world examples which should make you understand the API way better. That's it. Thank you very much for watching that video, guys, and I will see you in the next video, where we will put our hands on getting a very simple API. Thanks for watching. So let's jump now, guys, to our first API issue, and let's show how it works. Now, as you can see, we are on this link, api.coindesk.com/v1/bpi/currentprice.json. Okay, and here what you can see in front of you basically is an information provided from a cryptocurrency website, and this API basically gives you the current Bitcoin price. Okay, but now you can assess the information, but how you can basically interact with it, let's find out. So first of all, how did we get this information that you can see here? We got it with this link. So once you run this link into the browser, you basically send a GET request to the endpoint, and then the API is sending you a response in two components. First of all, it sends a request, it sends a response that says that the request was a valid one, and then it sends all this data here that doesn't make much sense. So good job, you already saw the data from the browser, but since this is a programming course, we would like to see this data programmatically, right? So for that reason, I will go to the terminal, and now let's try to assess this data from here. So what I will write is curl -i -x, then get, and here you can actually copy and paste the actual address. Okay, and then I will write another parenthesis. Okay, so you can see that, guys, after you write this and you write the GET request, and this is how you do the API, you basically get first of all HTTP/200, which is the first bit of information. So this means that the status of your request is valid, so you can proceed. Then a payload of data, which specifies the documentation here. Okay, so you get some information for the server, you get timestamps for assessing it, and so on. And once you get this information here, now you're able to see the data since everything's okay, and this here is the actual data. So actually, let's break down what we've done here. So obviously you understand now what this get request means, but why we added here -i and -x? So -i enable us to see the protocol response headers. For example, if I do it without I, let's see. So let's remove now -i and see what happens. You can see that you don't see the response protocol header, so we don't get all of this information, which for us is actually quite useful because obviously you want to see the documentation for the information that you are getting. And -x basically allows us to define the method we are using, which is get. So this allows us to basically use the tool that we did. And so guys, once you have this data, you might think, okay, but why would I need all of those data, right? Well, here, once you have this data, you can actually build a program that can show you the price of Bitcoin as it moves and build an application with it. And obviously this information will always change. So your program will always give up-to-date information, which is not possible without API. Hello everyone, today we're going to talk about the most commonly used data type with API, which is called JSON. And JSON is nothing more than simply formatting your data in a way that is understandable for you and for the computer. So what you basically have here is a key and a value. And key is description of the value. For example, let's say the key for me is person and the value is Martin, right? And for you it might be the key again person, but the value might be John or Adam or whatever name you have. The same with Bitcoin, you would have a key price and then the value would be price. So this is how the structure of the JSON looks like. Other types that are very commonly used are, for example, XML or even plain text. They're plenty of options to send and exchange data with a server, but the JSON was actually the most commonly used. And if you don't know what JSON means, it basically means JavaScript object notation. Okay, so it comes from JavaScript. And the reason why we actually use JSON quite often is because it is very easily accessible with most of the programming languages. Obviously, it is quite simple to do it with Java, but also it is very simple to use it with Python as well. And you can see how a typical JSON file looks like. So you would get name of the widget main window, you will get width, then the value, height, then the value. You would get image, and then you would define what are the parameters of the image. And usually you can have subkeys here. For example, for image, you can have the folder of the image that is located, the name of the image, and this is all again in JSON files. For example, for text, you can have data, check here, size and style, and many more. Okay, so this is the way that you basically include the JSON and how JSON file looks like. And then if you want to transfer the same data to XML, it would actually look like this. Okay, so it doesn't change the length too much, but actually you need to write, for example, width 2 times, not only 1, because it works based on those tags here. But with XML you basically have the value between the starting and ending tag for each section. But trust me, those files, they provide exactly the same data. Actually, from one I converted to the other. There are plenty of converters online to convert between XML and JSON. So if you want to do some project on your own, but you have one and you need the other, the conversion is quite simple. So before learning on the API design patterns, let's first talk about why API is needed and what we basically use it for. So the very first thing we usually use API is to integrate multiple applications. And this happens when two applications need to communicate and exchange data. So let's say that some company uses one system to count its employees' hours, how much they were working, and another system that counts their salary. Well, these programs could be completely different, created by different companies, different manufacturers, written with completely different code. So one cannot understand the other. In fact, During my work, I've been working with many systems that are developed from different companies from different countries. And we're always saying that one system speaks French and the other speaks German. So in order to communicate, they need some sort of bidirectional data transfer. And by doing that transfer, they could actually represent and estimate more accurate picture of how much the employee was working and how much the employee should be actually making this month, right? So for that reason, we're using API in order to exchange information between these softwares quite easily, and so both of them can provide the accurate output that we're looking for. The other reason we're using API is for building cross-platform applications. For instance, let's take Facebook. You can use Facebook not only from your computer, but you can also use it from your Android app, iOS app, and so on. So any updates that Facebook makes needs to be actually sent to each of those devices and be presented in the right way. And trust me, the different devices, they need their own data because they are written within specific programming language that understands different things. So for that reason, Facebook was smart enough to build their own API, so this data can be exchanged accurately and the information to the users can be the correct one. And also, by Facebook having these APIs, actually other users or other app developers can use the Facebook API in order to display data from Facebook into their websites, which is quite useful. Now, the next reason is actually one of the key reasons for the massive growth of Google and Amazon, and this is enhancing functionality of applications. So if you ever wondered why Google and Amazon are so advanced, for example, Amazon has about 50% of the market in US, well, this is because they have very good software engineers that can make sure that the data provided to Google or to Amazon is the correct one, and also the data sent to the users can be quite accurate, which enables different companies to make business with them. So for example, with Google, the OAuth API enables many different apps to use Google in order to manage their login. For example, if you've seen in some websites login with Google, well, this is API to Google, and once you select the button, you're actually transferred and you got information from Google. Then the next thing you can use APIs for is to provide external access to your application, and this is actually massively used by the trading apps, because there you need to buy and sell certain stocks or anything else, even currency, and in order to do that you need to have an accurate estimate for the exactly current price, and in that way you and the company you are buying with ensure that everybody is on the same page and you're not buying on a price that is not the real one. So this financial data is actually again provided by API. So the app that you're using is basically asking the servers how much is the price for buying and selling, and in that way you actually know and you can make a purchase instantly or sell. And the final concept is for building serviceless apps. And this means that if you want to create an app connected to certain API or to certain website, well, basically the information in your app will change as the API also changes its information. So in that way, you basically don't need to maintain the information inside your app, but this happens absolutely automatically, which is quite useful. And actually soon I think to launch my own website, which is going to make easier for the users to find Udemy courses, just because actually Udemy also have quite a nice API that can be used from developers, and every external user can create its own website and automatically update the data there or the courses showed there to be aligned with the courses that Udemy actually have. Now, after we talked what we use the API for in different scenarios, which I think is quite useful for you to see how important the API is and how it distinguishes the successful from unsuccessful companies, especially on the web space. Since you already know also that the APIs are using HTTP methods, those methods actually have certain architecture patterns. And there are about 4 quite famous architecture patterns, from which the most famous one is the RESTful API. And the RESTful API is basically a guidelines of 6 defined specifically points, and they define specifically which requests and responses to a server can be accepted based on those guidelines, but about this we're going to talk in really big detail later on. Then we have the GraphQL API, which was initially developed by Facebook, but now it's completely released as an open source project. So if you want to check it out on the web, please feel free. But it's actually, for a good reason, not that big part of a Facebook today, and this is because it struggles to handle dynamically changing requests, so it is a little bit more complex to use it comparing to the RESTful API. Then we have the CRUD API, which is typically used to build a database, and this one is also quite useful because it is actually mapped to the REST standard, so you find yourself many times in situations that you would use the RESTful API with the CRUD API to build a database. And finally, you have the SOAP API. I mean, I couldn't avoid mentioning this one because it is one of the earliest APIs developed out there. It's still used in some ways, but in this course we're not going to cover it, as we would like to look at more modern techniques to use APIs. So let's talk now about the RESTful API, since this is the one that we're actually going to use. It uses 4 HTTP methods, and I know that in the first slide I mentioned that we're using 6, but the ones that we're mainly going to use are actually 4, and they're the get, post, put, and delete. If you have some experience with GitHub, for example, you can see that there you quite often try to get some resources from there and use the get request. And another good thing about the RESTful API is that it's quite secured because it doesn't actually remember any of your previous interactions. So basically you're the one that is responsible for recording your historical data, because this API wouldn't do it just for security reasons. So this means that, for example, if you go to Google and let's say that Google actually uses the RESTful API, and for example you decide to go to some Google website like YouTube, well, YouTube will remember your data, or you would actually stay logged in, but Google will not know your information just based on that. So instead of Google remembering your information and storing it on the server, they are actually storing a cookie inside your computer. So this cookie that is your thing remembers the data, so you actually don't provide it to somebody else. So hello everyone, you probably understand by now that working and using APIs is something that we need to do programmatically. Simple interaction with the URLs is completely not enough, because in that way you have the information but you are not actually using it for some purpose. And for that reason you're using programming languages. And you can use APIs with pretty much every programming language, but the most common ones are C#, JavaScript, Python, Ruby, and so on. So for that reason, in that course, we're going to use Python and our terminal to basically assess and work with the APIs. So if you remember, last time we were using our command line and our terminal to run commands with API, but now we're actually going to use the Python-based Jupyter Notebook in order to do that. So let's jump to the Jupyter Notebook and see what we can basically do there. So let's pull up a terminal, and in order to activate the Jupyter Notebook, you simply need to write Jupyter Notebook in your terminal, and then your notebook would start, and you can see that you can see it in your browser, and basically you see your whole file system here. And I advise you actually to create a folder in your computer where you store all the files for that course. So this is what I'm going to be doing right now. I will just access that folder. So here I'm in the resources folder, and let's create a new Python 3 notebook, and you can see that here now you can type different commands and actually run them with Python. So once you're into your Jupyter notebook file, now you can actually run Python commands. So let's create a variable called URL, and the URL will be equal to the website that we assessed earlier on, as you can see here. And when I run it, it's already there. So if you don't know, actually you just need to press shift and then enter, or for Mac users shift and then return for going to the next line and running the previous one. So now we already created a variable called URL, and this is a string that is holding the URL variable that we created. Now let's write another variable called response equals to request dot get, and here we can write URL. And actually this command will actually not be accepted. Yes, we're getting an error, and the reason for that error is that earlier we didn't import the response library. So I will do import request, and let's run that again. It's actually requests. Okay, so now you can see that this is accepted since we have the library, and now we can use the get method. So now we get the URL and we assign this to response. So you can see that if you run the response file here, you get response 200, which means that the response is successful. And then let's create another file called data, which will be equal to JSON dot loads response dot content dot decode, and then I'll write UTF-8. So this is basically a protocol for decoding, and what I'm saying here is please decode the content that is stored into the response. Let's press shift. So there's an error here. Let's see what the error is. Yeah, so this is because we don't have the JSON implemented. So let's try to add it here. So I'll import JSON, and you can see that now this is understood, and since we didn't have the JSON library, of course we couldn't use the JSON method. And finally let's write data, okay, and you can basically see the same data or the data from the website, but now we can actually use this data inside our program. Okay, so since we're writing Python program, now I can actually assess the actual price of the Bitcoin and perform certain program with those parameters. Okay, so this is quite useful, guys. And the way that we got this information is, first of all, by importing the Python requests library here, then assessing the endpoint and assigning it to a variable that is called URL, then send the get request to the URL. So we say that we want to get the data, and you can see that this request was accepted. And finally, what we did here is we extracted the response that we got from the server into a JSON format, and we use it here. And now this JSON format is completely ready for you to use in your program. But okay, I guess now you're seeing all these files and you're thinking, okay, but how can I use it? How can I, for example, get the exact price of the Bitcoin here? Well, this is quite simple, and I'll actually show it to you right now. Let's write Bitcoin price will be equal to data, okay, and now we want to assess the actual price from the data. This is very simple. Simply write square brackets, and then in parentheses I write BPI. And if you think that BPI is some complex function, no, it is not. This is basically the outer layer here. So we have BPI here, and this means that we now assess this list here, everything inside BPI. So we assess the value of the BPI, which is the whole of this. Okay, so now once we're inside, we would like to assess the value USD, okay, which is this one. And now after we assess it, we would like to assess the price of the Bitcoin. So let's write rate and let's write float. Okay, so we get it. Actually, the only difference between rate and rate float is that here we're having a little bit better type of number. We don't have the last zero, the last digit zero, which we don't need. So let's do float. Okay, let's run that. And we don't have errors. So in order to print that, you simply need to do Bitcoin price. And as you can see, now you can get a number, an integer of the Bitcoin price. And now you can do basically everything with this number. You can add it in graphs, you can add it in some programs that estimate the Bitcoin and so on. You can use it for everything you like. And also, if you get the data for how the Bitcoin price is changing throughout the year, you can create a for loop to get every price placed in matrix and then predict what is going to be the future one. So I hope, guys, that this was quite useful for you and show you a practical example how API can actually significantly benefit you as software developer. Today we're going to talk about Flask, and we're actually going to start working with our projects for this course. So first of all, let's talk about what Flask actually is. So Flask is a framework that is written in Python. So Flask is actually one of the most basic frameworks, and for that reason it's called a micro framework, completely different for the more complex ones such as Django. So the positive aspects about Flask is that it is very lightweight and you can basically download extensions if you want additional features, and for the features that you don't like, you don't need to download the extensions, which will additionally slow down your programming process. So once you know what Flask is, let's actually start working with our project. And now until the end of the video, I will actually show you how you can download all the necessary files to start working with the APIs. So let's go to this web address, github.com cloud.bytes.dev/web APIs with Python. Okay, and here you're gonna find the projects that we're going to work with. They're open source, so everybody can download it and use it basically for wherever they like. You can also check out the book related to this project, which is here, and if you want to check it out, this is definitely a very good book if you want to work with Python. The book is not mine and I don't promote it because I have financial benefit from it. I just think it is a very nice tool for you to learn Python specifically for web API development. So if you would like to check it out, please feel free. Now once you go to this repository, you can select code, and then what I want you to do is to copy it. So let's copy this repository and select fork here. Actually, to do that I need to go to my GitHub account. Okay, so then you can select the fork and you can clone the actual directory, and now this means it is actually connected to your GitHub account, from which you already should have access from the terminal inside your computer. Now once you do that, you need to create a folder, and I actually already created a folder called API course, and here we're basically going to add all the code that we're going to be using. We'll create different projects and we're going to write on Python in order to update and create better APIs. But as a base, we're going to use this toolkit here, and how you can get it from GitHub automatically, you actually see that in this video. So let's open the terminal. And here what I want you to do is first of all to access obviously the folder which will contain your projects. So in my case, my folder is API course. Okay, and here inside now I can actually clone this GitHub repository. So to do that, it is actually very simple. You simply need to write git. Actually, let me increase the size a bit. So what you basically need to do is to write a git clone and then the address, and since you already copied that in your repository, what you need to do is to simply access your GitHub. So I write https://github.com /mpyanev 94, which is actually my GitHub username, and then web dash apis dash with python dot git. Okay, so this is your file, guys, and make sure that you type everything correctly, because we're going to look specifically for git clone and specifically for that web address. So hit enter here, and now as you can see, we start copying from GitHub into the local folder. And if I open the folder now, you can see that this file is getting copied here with all the licenses, agreements, and so on. So here in the requirements.txt, basically you get all the necessary packages that you need to install in order to run these projects. And obviously we're not going to install them one by one, but all at the same time, and for that reason we have this file here. So the next thing we need to do is to create a Python virtual environment, so we can actually use Python and manipulate our MPIs with this programming language. So what I need to do here is to write Python 3 -m venv for virtual environment and then env. And this is what would you write if you have a Mac, but if you're working on Windows, simply write Python without Python 3. This should do the same thing. But since I'm using Mac, I would write Python 3 /m venv and then environment. Okay, let's hit enter here. Okay, and now we create already a virtual environment, and you can see that if I open this folder, now we have here virtual environment. And actually we did one mistake here, because the environment actually had to be in the folder, so I write it manually, and then I will simply access it. So I will do web APIs with Python. Okay, and when I write LS, I see all the files plus the virtual environment file. Okay guys, so we're good here. And then after you do that, you would simply need to activate the virtual environment. So again, if you use Windows, you can simply write env /scripts /activate. Okay, but if you're using Mac like me, the code is slightly different. You need to write source env /bin /activate. Okay, so let's run that, and you can see that here in brackets you can see env. So now we're in Python environment already. And the final thing, since we're already in the Python environment, now we can actually install all the packages that we need. So I will do py3 install -r and then requirements.txt. So hit enter here, and you can see that now all the requirements will start installing in your folder. So now we are done, which means that we now have all the necessary packages in order to work with this API. And the last thing, guys, actually we're completely done with the first setup video, but the last things I would like to do is to simply rename this folder, because I don't want this to be with this name. So usually using Mac OS, and it's actually very similar in Windows, you can simply write mv, then the path to your folder, which is this one. So in order to rename your folder, you can either go the hard way from the terminal, but since we want simplicity, I will simply rename my folder from here. And we do that because we don't want to have multiple folders with similar names. So I will do project 1 here. Okay, and now if I write ls, I can see project 1. So cd project 1, and now we're in our project. So this is everything I wanted to share with you today, guys. This is how you install the basic repository, from which the next step would be to install each and every API depending on the project. So this step you need to do absolutely every time when you want to get a new project. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the course. Today I want to talk a little bit more about the projects that we're going to do in this course. As you can see here in front of you, these are all the folders that we will get from GitHub, and we're actually going to use them as our base for manipulating an API. And as you can see, the first thing we will do is to use this hello API using Flask, but you can see we have many other projects here with Flask, and also with different packages that we're going to use with Python. So let's get back to our terminal and let's start our first project. So in order to install the first project, first of all, make sure that you're in the folder project1, and then do git checkout, then p1-hello api-flask. Okay, and then you can see here, switch to a new branch, p1/hello/api-flask. And if I go now to the folder, you can see that here we have some additional file, and this is the app.py file. Okay, and here you can see some Python code, which is actually the code of our first API. So let's open that file in the Visual Studio Code and let's see what is basically inside. So I open the VS Code and let's select open, and we're actually going to open the whole project. So API course project 1, select open here. Yes, I trust the authors. And now you can see all the files in the project on your left hand side. Select api.py and you can see here a simple API. So the file app.py is basically the starter template of your API. And here in the to do, you can see basically what are going to be the tasks for us in order to create some functional API. So what we're going to aim by the end of this section is to be able to capture the first and the last name of a person. If the name is not provided, to respond with error. If the first name is not provided and the second name is provided, to respond in certain way, hello Mr. and then the last name. Then if the first name is provided, to respond in another way. And finally, if both names are provided, to respond in a different way. Okay, so this will be some sort of a looping and statements in order to achieve that, but we're very far from it yet. So now let's take a close look at this section. So going to the first part of our code, we can see that firstly here we're importing some libraries. So from the Flask library we import Flask, JSON file and request libraries, and this basically enables us to process our data in the right format and also create web requests, but later in the course we're going to talk about this in more detail. Then we're initializing the app with the Flask command here. Okay, so here we're running the Flask library. Okay, and we store the variable in the app. And here what we're doing is we're overwriting the get keyword with this greet addition after our link. And I'm sure that for most of you, what I'm talking to you right now, what is that link, what's going on? I mean, probably you don't understand anything, but we're going to try this very quickly and you understand what I mean. But of course, since it's already too much information in that video, let's continue in the next one. So there I will show you how you can actually run this code and get the API in your browser. Today I will show you how you can actually run your first API program in Python. So to do that, actually there is one very nice option in the VS Code, but let's first run the code. Okay, and once you run this file here, you can see that here in the console you are actually having a terminal. Okay, and make sure that in this terminal you're in environment and you're in the right folder. Okay, so you're in your folder project 1 and you're using the Python environment. So now you can simply write here Flask run. Okay, so once you run the Flask, you can see that here is written running on HTTP 127.0.0.1, and this is obviously the IP address of the API that you just created, and you can access from the web because now you're emitting this IP address. And actually, if you're more interested about what IP addresses are, how they are formed, what are the different protocols, then I definitely want to invite you to take my Python for network programming course, which will make all those topics completely clear for you. But even without it, you're completely able to cope with the rest of the APIs here. So let's open a browser. So once you open the browser, let's go to this IP address. Actually, you can even copy it if you're lazy. So if I copy this browser right now and I select it, you can see here that we see not found. The request URL was not found on the server. Well, this is exactly the case simply because we actually don't have any information on this specific address. But this is the reason why we wrote the word greet. So the word greet here means that after our link we would need to provide a slash and then write the word greet, right? And once we provide this word, obviously here you see to do, because we can see here the task to do, but now I can actually make this a fully functional greeting message by simply removing the to do from here, and I will actually remove even the greet keyword, and we can simply use the slash here. Okay, and let's just return here hello world. Okay, and instead of app.get we will do app.route. Okay, so let's save that now, and I will actually stop the API so we can restart it. And you can usually stop the API by selecting Ctrl and C, so you can see that now the API stopped. And if I run this again, you can see that we cannot find anything on the web. So let's write again Flask run, and now if I go to the greet page, we see nothing because we simply didn't define the greet page. But if I do only a slash after the IP address and I select this, you can see the message that we just wrote, which is hello world. So do you wonder what just happened? Well, we simply asked Flask to listen for our route, or just for this backslash here, which requests to go down the route of the IP address. And if you would write here greet, for example, greet, and then I close the API and I save this and I run the API again. So if I write here greet, well, here we're going down the road on the API and we're going to the greet message, which is hello world. And once we request some data from the greet, then this def index is basically determining how our page is going to respond. And in this case, we're returning hello world. And here's how the instructions for executing the program follow after this def index message here. So with simple words, when you open this address in internet, the browser sent a get message to the IP address /greet. And after that, we captured the listener, and the listener started looking for instructions on app.route, which consisted of the function defIndex. And since defIndex was displaying the hello world, this means that this is exactly what we're going to get in our function. Now, let's actually expand a little bit your skills, because I also want you to learn how to open this address like a pro programmer, not simply from the browser. So in that case, we will need, of course, to access our beloved terminal. And here I will be in the project 1 folder, which is the project that we're currently running. So simply write curl -i -x and then the IP address. So this will be http 120.0.0.1 column 5000/greet. Okay, actually let me remove those parentheses here. So we're writing curl -i-x. Don't forget the get keyword here, so we're getting what we need from the address. And then we simply write http, actually double backslash, and then our address. So let's hit enter, and you can see that we're getting response 200, which means okay, this is not an error. Then we get the contact type, which is our encryption. Then we get the length of what we see. We get the programming language, and finally we get the word, which is hello world. So this is how you can access actually the API from the terminal, which is, I guess, quite useful for you, especially if you want some high level access to your code and to the outcome of your code. In today's video, I want to show you something very important for working with APIs, and this is basically how you can transfer your data into a JSON format. This is quite important because in most of the applications you would want your data to have some structure, and to be honest, hello world with exclamation marks doesn't have much of a structure. So let me show you how you can do that. It is really, very simple, but we will need to change our app.py file here. So since the last time I was running this application here, and now I will have to stop it, so I will write Ctrl+C here in the terminal. Okay, so now the application is stopped, and let's do some changes now in the application so we can actually add some structure. So as you can see, we already actually added the JSON file function here, but we never used it. So let's change here app.get, and I will leave the greet message because I would like to add some additional keyword after the slash so we can assess our output. And then instead of return hello world, we're actually going to add something different. So first of all, I will add a variable called response equals, and here in brackets I will write data, okay, column, and then hello world. Okay, so this is going to be our data variable, and let's leave the parentheses closed. And finally here we're going to return, okay, return JSON file, okay, and I write response. Okay, so this is the response that we just created, and this means that the file here that we added in a JSON format will actually be converted to JSON by this JSON file function here. And this is how we're converting this Python dictionary into a JSON response using the JSON file. So let's go back to our terminal, okay, and let's run this programmatically. So I write curl -i -x get, and then http /127.0.0.1 and then $5000, then write another slash and write greet. Okay, actually don't run this command yet because we didn't actually start our file yet. So let's write, and actually let's first save this, and from the terminal let's write Flask run. Okay, so now our API is running, and now let's go from the terminal and hit enter here, and you can see that after hitting the enter button you get that we have a successful response. Our type is JSON, the length is 26 characters, we use Python, we get the date, and also you can see in completely JSON format our data. So this is the way that you structure your data in a very good way using the JSON format. And I know that today we did quite simple example, but trust me, when you deal with millions and billions lines of data, having it in the right format will definitely improve your search. And if you remember our Bitcoin example and how easily we assessed the Bitcoin price using the JSON format, you can definitely find the benefit of structuring your data. Hello everyone, and welcome to this more advanced section of the course. And basically here we're going to expand and learn new capabilities of what we were studying in the past section. So let's get started. So what we're going to learn here is how to make our API interactive. And this is very important and will bring us one step closer to what was our aim, namely to make the API respond depending on what inputs we send to it. So you will see how this is done. Now, if you remember from our previous videos, our mission with this project was actually to ask the user for his name by entering the link, and we're obviously going to start first with doing the step 3. So I will show you how you can actually pass a name or a random variable to the API, and this is very similar to how you actually search for things in Google. In that way you're providing the word that you're searching into the link, and this is how Google knows which words to search. And actually I'll give you one hint in this course. In some of the next sections, and actually I will try to do it this section, we're going to create a completely functional Google search using the same method. So please pay attention now. Now the first thing is, let's stop the API that is currently running. And what I will do here is, obviously I remove these lines, or actually, you know what, let me just comment them out and let's write under them. So imagine, actually let's leave them behind. Now here in the index function, let's write name equals request, and here I will write dot args dot get, and here I write name. Okay, then let's write response will be equal to, and here we're again gonna create a JSON format. So I write data column, and then here write f in order to format what's gonna be in the next sections. Hello, comma, actually here I would like to have parentheses. Okay, so hello, comma, and then name, and let's put an exclamation mark here. Okay, so as you can see here, we're basically using the name that we already defined. Okay, so what this means is that here we're going to get the name, and this will happen from the IP address of the API. And once we get the name, we're basically going to pass it here to this function, and this function supposedly should say hello and the name. Okay, and now finally we would like to return something in order for the user to see. So I will do return, then JSON file, so it is in JSON format, and then let's write response. Okay, that's great. So let's save that and let's run our API. So on terminal, simply write run Flask run, the other way around, and now we started. Okay, so let's go to this address, and you can see that actually here what we see is hello none, and this is because we didn't add actually any parameters here, and for that reason you see none. But now let's change that by writing greet, then question mark, okay, then name, and here is the time that you can actually add a value for the name, a value that you would like to send to the API. So I write as a name Martin. Okay, so let's hit enter here, and you can see that now we see hello Martin, and this is because on the place of the name now we make it equal to Martin, and the value of the name is no longer none. And you can actually do the same thing if you access this from the terminal. So let me show you how it's done. You can simply write curl -x get, and then http /127.0.0.1 column 5000, then slash greet question mark equals, actually name equals Martin, and let's hit enter here. And here we found no matches, but I think I know the reason. This is because here now we need to put some parentheses. Okay, let's hit enter now, and we're getting an error because I need to remove the S, so it's HTTP. Okay, so now you can see that we actually got a response in JSON format, which is hello Martin. So remember, always when you have parameters, you need to write parentheses here. Okay, and if you want to get some more information here, you can also write -i. Okay, so once you write -i, you can actually get not only the name, but you also get the type of response, the type of format of the file, the length of the string, and the programming language that was used. And I advise to do that because it is definitely very convenient to see what's working in the background of this program. Today we're going to talk about errors, and let's actually do one experiment. So let's go to the terminal and write the command that we wrote in the previous video. You can see it here in front of you, but instead of name, let's write fname. And if I write fname, you can see that we get hello none, and this means that to the value of name we don't have assigned anything, and this is pretty confusing, right? And this is true especially if you write very long codes. So to solve that issue, we're creating arrows which are way more informative for the users. So let me show you how you can do that. We'll write a simple code that will ensure that the name variable has the correct value, and if not, we would send an error message. So let's go back to our code, and here is the code that we actually wrote in the last video, and let's add a very simple line here. So we wrote name equals request.args.getName, and let's write if not name, okay, or if the name will be equal to false, then we'll return JSON file, and we can state an error by writing status column and then simply write error. That's it. Let's create a space here so we can distinguish between the different indentation levels, and you can see that here we're creating a name, but if we do not pass value to the name, we will return and we'll enter this if statement here, and we will return an error. So let's run the code again, guys, and let's see what happens. So I will first save this, and I will stop the previous run, and let's write Flask run here. Okay, so now we're running the API. So let's do it from the terminal actually. So simply write curl-i-x, then go to our IP address, and then instead of name write fname equals Martin. Hit enter, and you can see that now instead of none here, right, which was automatically created from the program, now we have a customly created error here, and we're getting that we have error. Okay, obviously instead of error you can basically send any message. So for example here, if I write instead of error please provide a name, and I save it and I rerun everything, you can see that when I select this, we're getting please provide a name. So this is a good way the user to know what he or she is missing, because simply getting the result none doesn't basically say anything, doesn't say if we have an error, and doesn't say what we need to do in order to solve the error, which specifically in the very big scripts it is very important. So don't underestimate the error detection, it is quite important. So I hope you paid a good attention to that video. That's it, guys. I really appreciate that you followed this lecture with me. Today we're actually going to accomplish our final goal for the project we're currently doing. And the goal is to create an MPI where if Martin myself, or you can write your name. If Martin contacts the API and he includes inside only his first name, the API will return hello Martin. If Martin provides his last name, then it will return hello Mr. Yanev, which is my last name. And finally, if the user, or in that case Martin, provide both of his names, then the API should return is your name Martin Yanev. Okay, so we already gained a lot of knowledge and you're completely ready to create this even on your own. So actually, if you want, try to pause the video and do this on your own. I think it is quite worth it. But of course, you're not obligated to do that. We're still learning. So if you want, you can follow with me to the rest of the video until we create this function. So let's go back to our app.py and let's create some logic here. So I will delete everything so far. I will just leave the def index, and just under it we'll write. So obviously here we'll need two variables. Fname for first name, so fname, okay, which will be equal to request dot args dot get, and here I will write fname. Okay, this is going to be the name of the variable, and then lname, which is actually your last name, and this will be equal to request dot args dot get, and here obviously write l name for last name. Okay, so now the arguments first name and last name are stored in these variables, and I want you to make a difference between the variable we select here and the variable we select here. So in the get function, this fname is what we're actually writing in our address or in our IP, okay? And fname is a local variable that stores the information that you provided to the fname. So for example, if my first name is Martin, then Martin will be stored in the fname variable here. So first of all, let's write our error detection. So I write if not fname and not lname. So if we don't provide first and last name, then we would like to display that there is an error. So we'll return JSON file. Okay, and here I write first I write status, okay, and then I write error. Okay, so we know that our status is error. Now if this is not the case, so elif, okay, fname and not lname, okay, this means that we would like to go to our first case where we say hello Mr. and then the name of the user. So I write response, so response will be equal to data, then column, and here we write f, and in the parentheses hello, and then in the brackets here fname. Okay, let's close them and let's write exclamation mark. So we say hello, then the first name and exclamation mark. Okay, pretty simple. Now let's write another elif. So elif not fname and lname. So this is the case where we wrote only the last name. Then in that case, we would like to create a response, and this response will be obviously equal to a different thing. So let's write data, okay, and then here f parentheses, and in the parentheses we write hello, comma, Mr. And then here we will provide the lname or the last name of the user or the person that we entered the name for. Let's write exclamation mark here. Okay, and finally, and in Python the final bit of the if statement is else, as actually it is in most of the programming languages. And finally we'll write response. So in any other case, and the only case that is left is that we write both of the names at the same time. So response will be equal to data and then column F, and here we write is your name, and here I write F name, then space and L name, and then you can write a question mark, for example. Okay, this seems right. And finally, obviously we need to display the input, so we'll return return JSON file and then response. Okay, let's save that, and I will close the previous session and let's run Flask. Okay, so you can see that now our service is running, and let's now go to the terminal and actually code the MPI. So let's write curl -i -x and then http column /127.0.0.1 column 5000 / greet question mark f name equals Martin, and here and we write with this symbol, and L name equals Yanev. Okay, let's close this, and here we get an error, URL not specified, and this is because we had to write the get command. So let me write it here, get. Okay, let's run it, and you can see that obviously all the information because we wrote -i, but the important thing is the output is your name Martin Yanev. Okay, so let's try the other cases. So let me actually remove the last name but use only the first name. You can see that here, yes, we have that case, and here we write hello Martin, and then if I write only the last name, so I write here L name. Okay, then we'll enter the if statement in the bit where we say hello Mr. So I will get hello Mr. Yanev. Okay, so this is how you can add some logic and manipulate the API how you like. And finally, let's test the final case. The final case would be if we don't have anything. And if we don't add anything here, you can see that our status is error, which means that every bit of our code has been completed successfully. That's it, guys. Thank you very much for watching that video. I hope you learned quite a lot, and actually here we completed our first task for the course. Thank you very much for watching, and follow the rest of the videos because we're closer and closer to develop our first Google search API. In today's video, we're going to start by learning more specifically what is URL, why we use it, and what is query string. So as you probably know, or maybe you don't, URL is Uniform Resource Locator, and what it basically does, it leads us to a web address, okay, to an address in the web. So it basically acts as a reference to a source that is located on a specific computer network, and basically provides us a mechanism to retrieve that source and actually use it for our own purpose. So a URL contains the following things. It contains a protocol, and the protocol usually is HTTP, and the more secured version that is used these days, HTTPS. Then it uses a domain name, for example, google.com, youtube.com, facebook.com, and so on. The username is specific name that is provided to the specific location that you want to access, and once you access, the domain name, then the domain can have different pages. So this page could be the index PHP page, it could be some HTML page, it could be a custom page that you created. Okay, if you check the URL of different websites, depending on which specific location you're in the website, you are accessing different pages, and these pages will be accessible with slash and the name of the page. And finally, you have the query, which is basically something that you should be already familiar with. And these are things that you can access with question mark, the name of query and the value of the query. And this is the way you're basically using the Google search and basically everything else that has something to do with sorting data based on certain standard. And actually, if you have a look at google.com, you can see that even though this is the most famous and the company that holds the website is one of the richest companies in the world, well, even here there is no difference, right? So when you go to Google, you go to google.com, which is a domain, the HTTPS is the protocol, then you do slash search, which is the page, then you do question mark Q, which is the variable of the query, and the value of the query is the search words that you're looking for. And for example, if you want to look at the Bitcoin price, then it search for the words Bitcoin plus price, and this is how you get what you need to search in Google. This is a specific parameter. And talking about Google search, actually this is the topic of the next videos, where we're going to create fully functional Google search and page. So let's get started and let me show you how this is done. So here we are, guys, in our terminal, and let's do cd and let's go back with the two dots. And if you write ls, you can see that now you're in your folder where you sort your projects. So what I'm gonna do is now I'm gonna install a different project that is called Bioc Flask, and let's install it. So we'll install it in the similar way how we did our previous tasks. So the first thing I will do is I will create another folder with the same repository. So let's write git clone https, and then let's write github.com/mpyanev94, but here you should write your username, okay, in the folder that you actually copied this repository, and then the name of the repository will be the same for all of us since we copied it from the same place. So I will do apis dash with dash python.git. Okay, let's select that, and you can see that again you're copying the same repository. So let's wait a bit, and then we can install the rest of the packages that we need. Okay, so the installation is done, and let's enter the folder. Actually, before that, let me actually rename it because I don't want all the folders to have the same name. So this will be project 2. So let's do cd project 2, and here now you simply need to write python 3 -m venv env, okay, to create a Python environment. And this is for Mac users. Again, for Windows users is Python without the 3. So for Windows users it would look something like that. So let's run that, and if I write ls, you can see that the environment, the Python environment, is now created. And now let's install all the packages necessary for us in order to execute this code. So now we have Python environment, but we need all the packages needed to run the Flask. But before that, let's actually run the environment. Actually, as you can see here, we are already in Python environment, but this is from the previous project. So I close this window so we can do it from the beginning and you can see how it works. So I will do terminal, and then let me increase the size, okay, and I will do cd API course, and then cd project 2, and here I write, let's actually check first. Okay, we have the environment, so we can write source env /bin /activate. Okay, so you can see that now the environment from that folder is activated. And then what you need to do is to install actually all the requirements, or this is actually this file here that contains all the packages needed. So I will do pipe3 install -r and then requirements.txt. Let's hit enter, and you can see that we are collecting all the packages that were collected in the text file. Okay, so now they are also installed in your folder, I suppose in the environment folder here. And after you do that, now it is time to actually copy the specific project that we were talking about. So let's do git checkout and then p2/bioc/flask. Let's run it, and you can see that now you switch to new branch p2/bioc-flask. And if I do ls, you can see that here we have some new files. So we have the app.py, we have the static file, and we have the templates file as well. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the course. Today I want to talk a little bit about what the package and the project that we downloaded contains. So obviously it contains the app.py, okay, which is basically the Python code that manipulates the data in our project, but it also contains some other things. So it contains the template file, which contains the index.html. And HTML, this is basically the Google page that you're going to see. Okay, since we're displaying a Google page, obviously we need some sort of HTML, CSS and JavaScript files, in order to be able to display it for fully functional page and implement the Python code on the web. Okay, I know it might sound a little bit complex, but this is actually the only way to transfer Python to the web, because all the web pages are a combination of HTML, CSS and JavaScript codes. So you need this base in order to then manipulate those pages with Python. Okay, and as I said, templates contain the HTML page, and the static basically contains the CSS file and the logo of Google, right? Or the picture that is going to be displayed there. So let's actually go to the folder and have a look at those files. So you can see templates is actually your page, and in the static you can see the logo, which is the Google logo, and the CSS file. So I'm gonna open it so you can see. So I have a very nice editor called Sublime Text, with which you can display those things in quite nice way. So you can see that here this is absolutely nothing complicated, but what we're displaying here is basically the height, the way we display it, the margins and so on of the different elements that we have on the screen. You can see here we display body, we display buttons and so on. And actually let me also show you the HTML file here. By the way, if you're interested in HTML and CSS and basically in web development, definitely check out my web development GSAP course, which goes over each of those topics, and you have very good understanding on what HTML, CSS and JavaScript are. So you can see here we're defining the search bar, which is the the Google search bar, and we do this from absolute scratch, right? So here we define the best fields, and here we design them in the CSS file, and then in the logo we basically use this picture here, the picture logo. We use it in our code in order to make the typical Google appearance. Okay, so this is about the HTML and the CSS files we display. Okay, this is not that complex, and except that we have the app.py file, which is our Python code. So knowing code those things, guys, actually doesn't seem so complicated to create a web page from our computer using API. Now, this is the previous project, so I'm gonna exit and I'm actually going to open a new project. Okay, and this time I'm gonna open project 2, select open here, select that you trust to the author, and let's select the app file, and you can see that this is fairly simple file that it looks and basically runs the page. And even now if you run actually the file, we can do it actually from the terminal. So if you do here Flask run, now you can see that your server is running. Okay, and sometimes I notice that if I run the code before doing Flask run, you might get an error here because you might not access the Python environment. So the Flask package will not be recognized since you are not in Python environment. So make sure that here you have env, which means that you're in Python environment, and then run Flask run from here. So let's go on the web and let's try some of those commands and see what we're gonna get. So you can see our starting point in this project. It is way far from completion, so you need to do a lot of work. So let's use this link, and I will do this link here /grid, which actually we don't have. So instead I will actually do search. Okay, so basically see nothing here. You just see the to do or our tasks, and also if I do just slash, you also see to do, right? Because we didn't add actually any information yet. And here you can see our tasks. So here what we need to do is to render the page that is provided in the templates index.html. Okay, this is the front page of the website. Okay, and then here in the search, our aim is to capture the word that is being searched and to search Google for that word. Basically to create a fully functional Google search with this code. So I don't want to overwhelm you more for this video, guys. I think it's already enough for today, but bear with me in the next one, where we're going to complete each and every of those tasks and we're going to create our fully functional Google search. That's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Creating a Google search. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the course. As I promised you in the past few videos, we're actually going to create a Google search in this course, and actually this is just the beginning of the amazing things that we're going to do. So the tasks for today are the following. We're going to render the HTML homepage of Google. Then we're going to create and submit a send API request as a GET request. Then we're going to create a query with a keywords that we write in the search, and then the search will be executed in Google. So we're actually going to be able to search the words that we're looking for. So let's get started. So the only thing we will do here is to basically modify the app.py. And the first thing we'll do is to basically display the template of Google. Okay, so in order to display an HTML file, you can simply write or return. Okay, actually I remove this return here. So return space render template, and this is already a known function, and simply inside you need to write the name of the function. So this is going to be index.html. Okay, so let's save that, and I will rerun the Flask run. Okay, so now we run our website with the index.html. So let's go to our web browser and let's go to the same browser as before. So now here, guys, you can see the Google HTML, you can see our search, and you can see these buttons, I'm feeling lucky, and Google search, and all of those things we already defined in our HTML and CSS files, all those buttons and the search as well. So now let's try actually doing some search, and let's select these buttons. For example, you know, for Google, when you select I'm feeling lucky button, you're basically searching random things. But if I select it here, I'm basically saying to do, right? Or this means that I'm saying nothing. And this means that actually when I select the I'm feeling lucky, I'm saying it to the link /search, and then I start the Google query. But since here we're not having anything, we're returning the to do keyword, and for that reason we cannot find basically anything, right? So we need to define what happens when we enter the /search page, right? And if you select the Google search, you're basically going to be sent to the same place. So we definitely need to change that, and the only thing to do it is by writing more code. So this is actually so simple that you can even not imagine. And what I'm gonna do right now is I will simply write args. Actually, let me make it full screen. So I write args equals request dot args dot get, and what we want to get here is the queue, right? Because let me again go to the page, because obviously when I go to I'm feeling lucky, we automatically go to search queue, and this is basically our variable to which we need to provide value in order to search. So obviously we're going to get what is assigned to that variable, and we're going to assign things to this variable with our Google search where we're going to enter keywords, right? So now let's write return, okay, return redirect, and here once we add something as an argument for queue, then we would like to add these arguments to the actual Google website. So I will do f HTML, or actually HTTP s, then / google.com/search, and here we're going to enter the query q equals args. Okay, very simple. So let me actually add some brackets here, and so the args holds all the arguments assigned to q, and obviously here we want to pass them to our address, so they're going to be displayed after q, and they're going to be sent to google.com. Okay, very simple. Let's save that and let's try our Google search. So let me do Control-C, okay, and then let's run this. So let's go to our link, which is 127.0.0.1, and then we'll go to our Google search, as you can see, and let's type something, cat pictures. Okay, so let's select the Google search, and you can see that here we're directly redirected to Google, and we're searching for cat pictures. Okay, you can see that the command of the query is cat %20 and then pictures. Okay, if I do just cat, for example, okay, here you are searching cat in Google, okay, and the query is simply q equals cat, right? This is exactly what we passed here. So this is how you create your custom Google search, guys. I'm sure that you didn't expect how easy this task is going to be. That's it. Thank you very much for watching, and in the next sections we're going to talk about how you can build an entire dictionary using APIs, and there we would write way longer scripts and way more lines of code, so you really need to be concentrated, and this is going to be probably one of the most important sections that you will see in this course, and it will prepare you for the next very exciting projects. That's it. Thank you very much for watching this section, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and please make sure to subscribe my channel to learn more coding skills.